It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Killed while seeking sanctuary. Sky News sees the devastation as Hamas claims dozens die in an airstrike on a refugee camp in Gaza. America's top diplomat makes a surprise visit to the West Bank, adding pressure on Israel to allow more aid into Gaza.
We've had trucks moving. We have about 100 trucks a day going in. That's good, but it's grossly insufficient.
Witness to a pattern of brutality, a special report on the scientists trying to identify victims of the Hamas attack.
I assume that there will be some people that will never be identified. Professionally, I hope that there will be as few as possible, and I want to bring every one of them to the grave.
Zero tolerance. The government denies a cover-up of rape allegations against one of its MPs. And pleased to see you, the rescue of Britain's loneliest sheep stuck at the bottom of a cliff for 2 years. And we will take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. We begin with claims from Israel's defense forces that its troops have encircled Gaza City and effectively divided the besieged territory into two. Tonight, all communications and internet services have been cut within the Gaza Strip. And as America's top diplomat continued his tour of the region, Hamas claimed dozens of people were killed in airstrikes that hit a refugee camp in central Gaza. Well, the blast happened at the Maghazi camp, located in the evacuation zone where Israel's military had urged Palestinian civilians to seek refuge. Sky News has spoken to a man who lost 4 of his children and his 4 siblings in the strike on the camp. A warning that this report from our correspondent Mark Stone contains images you may find distressing.
It is individual moments in Gaza which reflect the enormity of all this. This is Mohammed Al-Alou. In his arms, his little boy, Kais. And he's carrying him for a final goodbye. Beyond the door, Mohammed's wife, Kais's mother, too injured to leave hospital. And so she will say goodbye to her son here. And she will do it 4 times. Because Kais wasn't alone. He died with 3 of his siblings, Ahmed, Rahaf and Kinan. Mohammed lost 4 of his children. And he lost his 3 brothers too. And his sister and their children. His whole family. One after the other, they are lifted to be taken for burial. This is what dignity has become in Gaza. So much loss, there isn't space in the back. His firstborn will come with him. They were here at home on Saturday night when the missile hit. Like all the refugee camps here, Al-Maghazi is a town. It is an area where they were told by the Israelis that they would be safer. There are believed to be more families beneath the rubble. With Mohammed's agreement, our team in Gaza followed him for the burial, a drive that is replicated across this strip of land. I didn't get a chance to say goodbye to them, he says. He left for work early to film other people's grief that is now his. And so the final steps of this journey into a cemetery already prepared for so many. And then the rage spills over. He is the man who runs the cemetery. Are these Hamas fighters, he shouts? Are these Hamas commanders? He's speaking in Hebrew. The message is for Israel. God will help us to take our revenge, he says. It is a statement that hints at so many troubles ahead. Here, now, they bury their families themselves. And so, side by side, together, so many from one family are laid to rest. Mark Stone, Sky News in Jerusalem.
Well, earlier, the Jordanian Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi told Sky News a two-state solution is the only way to move forward.
We will not accept a Gaza alone approach. Gaza alone is unacceptable. What needs to be done is a comprehensive peace plan that addresses both the situation in Gaza, the West Bank, and it should be based on and geared towards a comprehensive solution that will result in the establishment of a viable sovereign Palestinian state.
Lebanese state media say 3 children and their grandmother have been killed in a car by an Israeli airstrikes. The IDF says it has targeted terrorist vehicles. Also tonight, an Israeli military spokesman says 1 person has been killed by an anti-tank missile fired by Hezbollah from Lebanon. And this comes as the U.S. Secretary of State has continued his diplomatic tour, visiting the Palestinian president in the West Bank. Speaking from Baghdad tonight, Antony Blinken repeated calls for a humanitarian pause and for the release of the hostages held by Hamas.
We have about 100 trucks a day going in. That's good, but it's grossly insufficient. So now we're working on raising that significantly so that more aid in a sustained way gets into Palestinians who need it. There again, a humanitarian pause can also help advance that and create an environment in which we can do as much as possible for people who so desperately need the assistance.
Well, our correspondent Mark Stone is live in Jerusalem for us tonight. And Mark, communications between Gaza and the outside world have been cut. The IDF now says they've encircled Gaza City. Antony Blinken is asking for a pause, but how much do you think he's actually achieving on this trip?
Honestly, Barbara, very, very little. I think this trip has not gone at all well for him. I mean, if you look at the individual objectives that he wanted to get, he wanted a humanitarian pause. That has not come. His close ally Israel has not been able to give him the pause that everyone seems to say is so desperately needed. And as you could see in my report there, it is clearly needed. So the pause hasn't come. The Arab world and, in fact, many Western countries now increasingly are calling for a full ceasefire. Well, that has not come either. Look at the West Bank. Settler violence against Palestinians is huge at the moment. It is showing no signs of settling down. And yet he had been telling the Israelis they must get a handle on it. They haven't. And then look at the situation in Gaza. All he could come away with was that what you heard there, saying that there are a few trucks that are bringing aid in. Well, that was the case before he got here. This, for America, diplomatically, is looking very bad. For the people of Gaza, it is looking truly terrible. I've been speaking tonight to a senior official at an aid agency working in Gaza who said to me that she believes that what is happening now, what Israel is trying to do, is push the people of Gaza not just to the south but into one tiny pocket, a humanitarian pocket on the coast in the south of Gaza, and that they will keep them there and clear the rest of the enclave.
Mark Stone with the latest from Jerusalem. Mark, thank you. Well, Scotland's First Minister, Humza Yousaf, has confirmed that his in-laws have returned home to Scotland from Gaza. Elizabeth El Nakla and her husband Majid, the parents of Mr. Yousaf's wife Nadia, were allowed to leave Gaza on Friday through the Rafah crossing into Egypt. They had been stuck in Gaza for 4 weeks. Well, the return of the First Minister's family is in stark contrast to the scores still stranded in Gaza. The Foreign Office says it's disappointed that the Rafah crossing from Gaza to Egypt has been closed, preventing more British nationals from leaving. People who have made it out say a lack of support and bureaucratic hurdles mean family members are being left behind. Caterina Vitozzi reports now on one family torn apart by the war.
She moved there in 2015.
Yusra Al-Shanti is from Manchester and moved to Gaza to study 8 years ago. She got married there and had 2 girls. When war began, the family got a call that changed their lives.
They received a call, yes, from Israeli authority that you should evacuate your home immediately.
This is the family fleeing south to a refugee camp. Yusra, who's 6 months pregnant, is just visible behind her husband Ibrahim, next to their girls, 6 and 3, who both, like their mother, have British passports. Back in the UK, the Foreign Office told Yusra's father the young family could all cross into Egypt and that there'd be help there with a visa for Ibrahim, who has a Palestinian passport.
They told me we have communication, close communication with the Home Office, and now they have a border force team and immigration team on the ground in Egypt to help such people to land in UK. So there will be no problem, everything will be sorted professionally.
But after arriving in Cairo, it all went wrong.
When they met the Home Office team, it was a disaster. They mentioned to them what we can do for you, and she mentioned to him, this is Ibrahim, my husband, and he's a Palestinian, and we need a visa. They mentioned, what we can do nothing for you. Go and apply for a visa. What type of visa? We don't know. So she returned back with full of tears, crying and asking why I came to this with no support. It's better for me to stay back in Gaza rather than to stay in or to be in such situation.
The family have no idea when, even if, Ibrahim will get a visa, and the government-funded emergency accommodation in Cairo is only for 72 hours.
When they cross the border to Egypt, believe me, they just have only $100. And now how they will stay in Egypt, how many weeks, how many days, we don't know. How they will spend, how they will eat, still we don't know. Nothing at all.
The Foreign Office confirmed they are aware of the family's struggles, telling us this continues to be a complex and challenging situation. We remain in contact with British nationals in the region to provide them with the latest information. As for Yusra's family, they don't know what's next.
I think maybe the FCDO has no authority or has no power on the Home Office.
And Yusra and her family have become caught in that?
Yes. Yeah, they're trapped in the middle.
Katerina Vitozzi, Sky News.
The Deputy Prime Minister, Oliver Dowden, says he has grave concerns about a pro-Palestinian protest planned for Armistice Day, saying it could lead to violence and instability during commemorations in central London. Amelia Harper reports.
Bring them home! Bring them home!
At Parliament Square, there's only one message. Emotions are high as those gathered here remember the fate of hostages taken by Hamas.
I'm afraid working with Yamluka, working on the street or even speaking in Hebrew. And for us being here today is a very important message. We're thinking about the people who've been kidnapped from Israel and how horrible it is.
In other areas of the country, pro-Palestine protests are calling for a different message. This, the latest rally after 4 weeks of protesting, which has seen 29 people arrested and 4 police officers injured. Organisers say they're supporting Palestinians, but speaking exclusively to Sky News from Greece, the Home Secretary Suella Braverman calls them hate marches. Also giving his opinion, the Deputy Prime Minister.
I represent a large Jewish community. That community are fearful right now, and we shouldn't see this just as a matter for the Jewish community. We should see this as a matter for all of British society.
These comments from ministers come as reports today suggest that the government has drawn up proposals to broaden the definition of extremism to include anyone who undermines the country's institutions and values. But there are fears from some that legitimate groups and individuals could be branded extremist and free speech curtailed. And for those who work in protest law, this creates a grey area.
The bigger you make the net, the more organisations and individuals it would bring in. And that could well include, peaceful organisations that are nonetheless controversial or campaign on controversial issues.
In contrast to this weekend's smaller events, there are plans for a mass rally on Armistice Day. Both the Met and the march's organisers say they won't go near the cenotaph on Whitehall. What's clear is that while criticism from some corners is mounting, protests related to the Israel-Hamas war will continue. And the messages from all of them ring loud and clear.
Bring them home! Bring them home!
Amelia Harper, Sky News.
The leader of Burnley Council and 10 other councillors have resigned from the Labour Party tonight over Sir Keir Starmer's decision not to push for a ceasefire in Gaza. In a statement, they said it has become apparent that Keir Starmer and the leadership either cannot or will not heed our concerns or acknowledge the sentiments within our communities. Tuesday sees Parliament host the King's Speech, where Rishi Sunak's legislative plans for the year ahead are laid out. Well, let's speak to our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, who is in Downing Street. Sam, Rishi Sunak has said his plans will help build a better future for Britain. So how is he planning to do that?
That's right. Well, this is the first King's Speech for Charles as monarch, and it's the first King's Speech from Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister. Charles has got to show that he understands what being monarch means at this time. That means he has to put aside what we're pretty sure from his time as regent are his views as he reads out government proposals to roll back measures and protections on the environment, and I'm sure he will do that. The stakes for Rishi Sunak arguably are even higher. He has to show a vision of the future, how his government would differ from a future Labour one, and bluntly, he needs to grab attention. Which is why it's so fascinating that this weekend he has relied on his Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, to do just that, with those proposals in particular to ban tents for the homeless, to stop charities giving the homeless tents. There are also a lot of other crime bills at the heart of this King's Speech, because elsewhere it's quite tricky. You look at some of the flagship proposals on homes and renters and leaseholds. There, the fine detail on all of that isn't yet sorted. It's complicated, which is why Rishi Sunak has had to rely on that. Rishi Sunak knows that this is one of the big 5 events of this autumn, alongside the autumn statement, alongside his conference speech he's already done, alongside reshuffles and alongside the net nutrient announcement about house building and net zero proposals. Will this one manage to change the dial in his favour?
Sam Coates with the latest there from Downing Street. Sam, thank you. And if you scan the QR code on your screen right now, you can get more of Sam's predictions for the King's Speech in the latest edition of the Politics at Jack and Sam's podcast. Now, this week, Sam and Politico's UK editor Jack Blanchard look ahead to the King's Speech with some expert intel from our royal commentator Alistair Bruce. And you can subscribe to Sam and Jack's podcast, and you should, wherever you get your podcasts. The Deputy Prime Minister has insisted the Conservative Party has a zero-tolerance approach to sexual misconduct. Oliver Dowden was addressing reports that the party had covered up a series of offences committed by an MP.
Any allegation of sexual misconduct I take extremely seriously, and the Conservative Party has zero tolerance for sexual misconduct. We have an independent complaints mechanism, and that investigates any allegations. It may be the case that these matters are subject to an ongoing criminal investigation.
Thousands of people have been left without water after Storm Ciarán caused a technical issue at a treatment works in Surrey. Long queues have been forming at bottled water stations in Godalming and Guildford. Thames Water says it has made progress in fixing the problem, but the water supply is only likely to return gradually through tomorrow. Flights have resumed at Hamburg Airport following disruption caused by an earlier hostage situation. A man is in custody after he drove through a security barrier with his child in the car and parked under a plane. Police say he was arrested without resistance after an 18-hour standoff, and the child appears to be unharmed. Now, the painstaking work of identifying the remains of victims of the October 7th Hamas attack in Israel is being undertaken by the Center of Forensic Medicine in Tel Aviv. Their scientists receive bones and body parts and then attempt to test them for DNA. But they say that some people will never be identified. A warning: Cordelia Lynch's report contains images of human remains and graphic descriptions of injuries, which some might find distressing.
This is a very small institute. It's not built to be in this capacity.
Dr. Kugel is exhausted. He spent weeks trying to identify the victims of the Hamas attacks.
We're going to the DNA lab, and people are working here.
Day after day, the remains of the dead arrive.
I want to show you something so you get some impression.
He's witnessed a pattern of brutality that haunts him.
If you do CT, you can see that the pelvis is shattered. These are bullets inside. So he was shot, he was stabbed, he was burned, and then he was run over.
They sift through charred fragments, looking for clues in skeletons shattered by explosions and bones bleached by fire.
A body is not burned like this. This is like a crematorium. So they put more and more accelerating agents in order to make it totally gone to ashes.
He's had very few moments to sit. When he does, you get a sense life will never be the same again.
What are some of the individuals that have stuck with you in your mind?
Well, I have these people that were tied and shot, and sometimes you can see the terror on their face.
How difficult has it been trying to identify these people and deliver information to the families who so desperately need it?
I assume that there will be some people that will never be identified. Professionally, I hope that there will be as few as possible, and I want to bring every one of them to the grave to give him the last honor. Sorry. But we'll do it. We'll make it happen.
Dr. Nurit Bublil's team is working on the hardest cases.
And this is Tommy Icons. Hello. Hello.
Here in the DNA lab, they try to analyse tiny bits of tissue, often all that is left. But there are other items that have rocked them to the core.
This is a baby mattress. It was taken from one of the houses. It is covered with bloodstains. And this baby was probably stabbed in his own bed.
It's a huge toll on their minds and their hearts.
People were burning in their home, and they were laughing, and they were filming, and they stood outside the window enjoying to witness the whole family burnt on fire. For hours, they slaughtered our people, and they enjoyed every minute of it.
Hour after hour, the body bags come. Families looking for closure. Others have no survivors left to even claim the dead. Cordelia Lynch, Sky News, Tel Aviv, Israel.
Okay, let's get all the sport now with James.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
I was born and raised here, so you just naturally, obviously, you enter the competitions here, and that's just how it works. So I never really thought about the possibility of representing Poland or Jamaica, even though that's where my blood's from. So that was just natural, and the Olympics was the dream. And obviously I would have been so proud to have represented Great Britain, and I was in the other competitions that I got to do it in, but it was the Olympics as the dream.
So talk me through when you went and told the Jamaican side of your family that you would go in to compete for Jamaica at the Olympics. What happened? How excited were they?
So I was in LA at the time, and my mum and my brother were helping to talk to my Jamaican side of my family to sort the documents, and it was really great because we got to get in touch with a lot more of the family members that we didn't know, because my parents are split up, so we didn't really have a strong relationship with my dad, who is the Jamaican side. So we got to know my great uncle and all of his children, and now we have a good relationship with them. So that's been one incredible thing that's come out of everything.
What else was it that really made you gravitate towards there and not Poland?
I felt like I would just fit in more. I think the spirit that you see the Jamaican athletes with their personality and their charisma, I felt like I would fit that mould. My Polish isn't great, so I thought, yeah, I would definitely fit into that team and I'd have a good time. And also, I did realise that the programme was at the very beginning, so I realised that would come with some struggles, whereas Poland's actually got a bit of a developed gymnastics programme, so I knew there'd be some struggles both ways, kind of either breaking into an established programme or trying to help start or be near the beginning of a brand new gymnastics programme. Just being there and being around it and the energy, and also seeing how seriously they're taking it is amazing. And thinking in the future, if we can continue sort of the momentum that we've already got behind it, that there could be a Jamaican gymnast or a team on that podium, and knowing that I was maybe a tiny, tiny part of that is really, really exciting. Yeah, when I felt really accepted by Jamaicans, that was really special to me. In 2019, I did a competition that was a friendly sort of exhibition type competition where the rules were different and you could have a lot of fun, so I really got to show my personality, and I felt like my Jamaican side really came out, and yeah, I was just giving it all the personality and charisma. And some of my routines went somewhat viral, especially in the Caribbean, so then I felt like I really gained a lot of respect and more of a following from the Jamaican community, and from then on I felt like so proud, and that other people and the Jamaican people that have watched me are also proud of me, which was, yeah, really special.
What was it like going from being, I guess, like a minority to Jamaica where everyone looks like you?
Yeah, pretty amazing, and it also fills me with pride that those gymnasts will have role models all around them, and I think that's a really positive outlook for the future.
10, 15 years ago compared to now, how do you kind of view your ethnicity, nationality, your heritage? Are they different after?
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
After spending 2 years stranded at the bottom of a cliff in the Scottish Highlands, Britain's loneliest sheep has been rescued. The ewe, which has been named Fiona, was described as overfat, but an incredible fettle by one of her rescuers. Lisa Dowd has her story.
This is where she was stuck, at the bottom of a cliff miles from anywhere in the Scottish Highlands. After 3 years of isolation, help was on its way to rescue Britain's loneliest sheep.
I would be lying if I would say we had any sort of real clever plan. Graham, who's an integral part of the team, bought a couple of long ropes from Tiso on the road up, and we had a very strong canvas feed sack that was big enough to hold Fiona, and we were able to cut a little hole so that she could get her nose out to breathe. And the incredible thing was she was so relaxed throughout the whole process. As we were dragging her up, she actually started nibbling at little bits of grass.
The owner couldn't get to Fiona, so this group of farmers said they'd help.
We've come up here with some heavy equipment and we've got this sheep up an incredible slope. Let me just bring you in close to her here. Fiona.
She had 3 years worth of wool on her, and that essentially meant she floated up on a cloud. It was like she was wrapped in a mattress. So we didn't have to worry about that side of things, and the three of us kept a hold of the bag and just navigated the bag as we went and just kept manoeuvring around rocks and bushes and trees until we eventually got safely to the top without a scratch on her.
After a much-needed trim and a health check, isolation seems to have done Fiona no harm.
We've all been absolutely blown away by how stress-free she is, how natural she feels around us, and she feels completely comfortable.
She may have been content pottering around at the bottom of the cliff, but the farmers expect her to have a longer, happier life in her new home on a farm park in Dumfries. Lisa Dowd, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's papers in the press preview, including this story on the front of the Eye. Their headline, UK's National Security Council not prepared for heightened terror threat. And tonight we're joined by the political editor of the Daily Mirror, John Stevens, and economics editor of The Spectator, Kate Andrews. We'll be right back.
The press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
There's a feeling amongst some commentators that it's not the most respectful timing.
I think there's a word for it, fake news.
I mean, it's wow from Harriet. Delving deeper into the stories with different perspectives on tomorrow's headlines.
We really haven't seen the government getting round the table and negotiating. There are no easy answers to those questions.
The press preview delivering you tomorrow's news tonight on Sky News.
The 5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
This is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. First, though, let's take a look at our top stories. Hamas claims dozens have been killed in an airstrike that hit a refugee camp in central Gaza, as the Israeli military says it has encircled Gaza City and divided the Strip into two. The Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden says he has grave concerns about a pro-Palestinian protest planned for Armistice Day. The government denies a cover-up of rape allegations against one of its MPs and says it has a zero tolerance for sexual misconduct. Hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the political editor of the Daily Mirror, John Stevens, and the economics editor of The Spectator, Kate Andrews. So let's see what is on some of those front pages. The National Security Council, which has been meeting in recent weeks to brief ministers on the rising threats due to Israel-Gaza conflict, is unprepared to deal with the workload. That's according to the Eye. In The Guardian, they report on the rising tensions on the Lebanon border, while at the same time, Gaza was rocked by a series of huge explosions and communications with the territory cut. The Metro leads on the Home Secretary's remarks that any protesters who vandalize the cenotaph must be put in jail faster than their feet can touch the ground. The FT reveals the Prime Minister is set to unveil plans for new licenses to drill for oil and gas in the North Sea. And according to the Daily Express, a new report shows leaving the EU has boosted UK trade. In The Sun, war heroes are calling for pro-Palestine marches on Remembrance Day weekend to be cancelled. The Daily Telegraph leads with the same, saying pressure on Yard to stop pro-Palestinian rally after warnings of clashes with veterans. And pressure on Tories over serial rapist MP cover-up. That's in the Daily Mail. And in The Star, here we blow again. Forecasters expect 4 more storms to hit the UK with 70 miles per hour winds and torrential downpours. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the program, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by John Stevens and Kate Andrews. So thank you both very much for being with us. OK, let's start straight away with The Guardian. Front page there, and the headline, Israeli strikes on Gaza intensify as violence on Lebanon border flares. And of course, we should remember that communications were cut to Gaza, so Gaza's sort of been cut from the rest of the world a few hours ago. So very difficult to get information out of the Strip. But obviously this comes as Antony Blinken is doing a little tour of the Middle East. Kate, what do you make of the developments, especially during the Secretary of State's visit?
Well, he is essentially calling for some kind of humanitarian pause, perhaps not even a full ceasefire, but Blinken's focus continues to be on the hostages, particularly those American hostages. The U.S. is not the only country that is calling for Israel to offer some kind of humanitarian pause, as there are dozens of different nationalities who have been taken hostage, and they're desperate to organize a situation where they can get them out. But, you know, I think we're seeing a little bit of a balancing act here, because you did have President Joe Biden, who is being so clear about his support for Israel. He then sends his Secretary of State to do a bit of a tour. He's been in Baghdad, now he's in Turkey. And I think that there's a real focus there on trying to suggest, actually, look, we're looking at this from different perspectives. But as we're going to discuss in the next story, there's no indication that we're going to get that ceasefire.
Before we get there, though, let's focus on what the Guardian look at specifically, because they sort of see that there is a danger with Lebanon, especially, and Hezbollah in Lebanon. What did you make of their angle and this risk of things escalating on that border?
Yeah, so just as Antony Blinken is trying to dampen down the tensions in the region, you do see that things are starting to get worse on the Lebanon border. They're talking here in The Guardian about how there was an Israeli strike in southern Lebanon that killed 3 children and their grandmother. And obviously, Hezbollah has retaliated against this. They've started launching strikes back into Israel. It's talking about how the Israelis have had to get into their bunkers underneath their houses. I think that missile might have struck one of the roads in southern Israel. And so just as the situation with Gaza isn't seeming to get any better, it also seems to get inflamed on the northern side of Israel as well.
Let's look at the Metro now, page 5. Similar, well, the same story, slightly different angle here. Netanyahu rejecting pleas for a ceasefire. Now, obviously, there's a difference between ceasefire, which would be a permanent pause, and then a temporary pause to allow aid in, and hostages out. But, of course, the Israelis very determined that they want to get rid of Hamas. They don't want to give them any chance to regroup. How much pressure do you think it's putting on both the US government or the UK government, the fact that the death toll continues to rise? We're seeing numbers now around 10,000. I mean, you know, it's hard to get exact numbers, but around there. How much pressure do you think it's putting on the governments to act and try to pressurize Netanyahu in turn?
Well, I think we have seen a slight change in the position of the US. Obviously, you've got Antony Blinken there calling for this humanitarian pause, not calling for a permanent ceasefire, but saying that we need to see some sort of end in fighting so the aid can get in and the hostages can get out. So I think you have seen that there has been a slight change in position. Keir Starmer in the UK, he's been calling for a similar thing, these humanitarian pauses, that I think it does get extremely difficult for the government to stick to the line they did have when you see so many civilians, including lots of children, dying in that area.
I agree. The BBC is reporting that tonight might be the most intense bombing that we have seen of Gaza since this conflict escalated, and it is impossible to ignore that. But I think the real pressure is on Israel. I mean, obviously, countries like the US and the UK do not want to see the region flare up anymore. That could be quite detrimental to those countries. But ultimately, the pressure right now is actually coming from countries like the US towards Israel to say, we need you to take a brief pause. And that's where you're really seeing this tension, because Netanyahu has not signaled whatsoever that he's willing to take that pause.
And there is a lot, because really it's only the US that has any kind of sway over Israel. And it's interesting. I mean, Biden obviously is not going to force Israel to do anything, but I don't remember other US presidents using even that kind of language that he has used, trying to convince Israel to stop, even in previous conflicts between Hamas and Israel. Do you think that there is a slightly different sense to this war in the US?
Not at the moment, I do. I mean, politically speaking, I think the Republicans and Democrats are more or less united on this front. They're not on Ukraine anymore, but on Israel, it certainly seems that there are. And the U.S. has tried to play negotiator between the two sides for a long time. So I don't think it's particularly unique, but I think Blinken is being used. I don't mean that in a bad sense. I just think he is quite a convenient tool right now to indicate that the U.S. Does recognize the nuance in this situation. But it is one that Joe Biden still, is going to be pretty firm on one side.
Let's focus now closer to home, the front page of the Metro. Remembrance warning, hands off the cenotaph. And this, of course, a quote by Suella Braverman, who said that anyone basically who tries to touch the cenotaph, other war memorials, their feet won't touch the ground before jail. So very strong words from her. What do you make both of the stories and the narrative that Suella Braverman is putting forward?
Well, I think clearly if anyone did do anything close to the cenotaph, so close to Armistice Day and Remembrance Sunday, that would be totally unacceptable. But I think that a lot of this is hypothetical. You look at what is actually planned for next week. Yes, there is a march planned for Saturday, which will be the 11th of November. But the organisers who are going to meet the Met Police yesterday have said that they're happy to go nowhere near Whitehall and they're happy to do it later in the day so it doesn't clash with 11 a.m. when a lot of people will be marking the remembrance. And so, therefore, I think that clearly it would be unacceptable if something was done that was disrespectful, but it sounds like the organisers are keen that that doesn't happen. Obviously, it may be that some idiots decide to do something rather stupid. I think it's a very different thing, people holding a protest elsewhere in London later in the day than doing it maybe on Remembrance Service and trying to do anything that disrupts the kind of activities that are going on around the cenotaph.
I imagine that the organisers of the protests are well aware that anything disrespectful will be huge backlash to their cause. It is just something that's not going to be tolerated. But I think the emphasis for me here is that we already do have laws that protect from that sort of behaviour. And at the moment, there's a lot of call to expand the role of the state, to expand the role of policing. I often think, well, let's actually look at the rules in place, and we can ask legitimate questions about whether or not they're being enforced. But, this kind of overreach is something that I think the government thinks is playing very well for them in from a rhetoric sense right now, but whether it's actually necessary is another question.
OK, let's look at the front page of the Financial Times now. Sunak to unveil bill for new licenses to drill more North Sea oil and gas. Tell us more about this story, Kate.
We have the King's speech coming up on Tuesday, I believe, and it looks like a major focus of legislation that's going to be in that speech is to mandate annual North Sea oil and gas licensing rounds. The government is trying desperately to show how it is different from the Labour Party at the moment, not least because the Labour Party have essentially decided to follow the Conservatives' economic plans and statements, and that's usually where they can draw some kind of divide. And given the fact that Keir Starmer has said that he would rule out new licenses for oil and gas, and Conservatives think that their changes to net zero play well, they're really trying to emphasise this. Is this a massive change? Almost certainly not. John?
I mean, there's no need for this legislation at all. This is basically just a political gimmick, and it is quite funny that the government briefed into the Sunday papers. This quote from Rishi Sunak said it was no more gimmicks, it's all going to be about long-term decisions. And then the story into Monday's papers is this, which is purely a political thing. And after that by-election in Uxbridge and South Ruislip, the Tories clearly think that going slightly backwards on green policies is something that might be quite helpful for them. But even though they did win that by-election, you look at the polls ever since, and there hasn't been a big change in favour of Rishi Sunak when he announced all those changes on petrol and diesel cars.
But it is where they saw the small but biggest shift, isn't it? Because after the party conference speech where they were talking about education and a ban on smoking for the next generation, there was no shift. So if there's any area where they think they might get a bit of traction, they think this is it.
Okay, John, stay with us. We're going to be looking at more of tomorrow's papers. Coming up, there you are. The Scottish First Minister's parents-in-law have arrived in Scotland after fleeing Gaza. We'll discuss that next.
I slipped on a puddle on the platform and crashed against the stationary train, fell through the gap in between the train and the platform. I injured myself badly enough to break a nose and my 2 front teeth, and then the train departed and took my right arm with it. I was conscious throughout and I shouted for help, and nobody heard me. And the second train came into the platform and claimed my right leg. I was still conscious after that, still determined to make it home, because in my mind's eye, I could see my 2 daughters and they were telling me, "Mummy, you have to come home. What are you doing?" And at that point, somebody heard me. I was on the tracks for 15 minutes before somebody raised the alarm, and then it took another hour before the rescue services arrived. And there were a series of things that delayed my saving, basically. I was told that switching off the power line took ages because nobody knew who to contact, so the paramedics couldn't get under the train to get me out of there. Eventually they had me on a plastic board and shoveled me all the way up, I don't know, 30 metres of underneath a train carriage. Apparently the staff didn't know which number to call. It obviously has a major impact, and the sad thing, it's not impacting just me, it's impacting all the people around me, especially the closest, my daughters, my husband. I mean, it's been a really, really tough year, and there are days where everything's so dark that the thoughts of thinking, why did I even survive this? I was told by doctors I should have died 10 times that night. We are led to believe that CCTV is being watched live. It is not. Could there be an AI system that monitors that? Why are there no sensors on the tracks? Every car has got a sensor, but not the tracks. How come there's no staff in the stations? I'm led to believe that this was a freak accident, an unfortunate series of events, but it's not true. I have, since the accident and since I've spoken publicly about it, received hundreds and hundreds of messages from people who said, "Oh, this nearly happened to me."
Welcome back. You're watching the Press Preview. With me now are the Daily Mirror's political editor, John Stevens, and the Spectator's economics editor, Kate Andrews. Thank you so much for being with us. OK, let's go straight to Metro, page 5. And this is the story of Hamza Yousaf's in-laws now back in the UK. Obviously, they were in Gaza for those 4 weeks. You know, he gave interviews about how worried, understandably, he was. What did you make of it, John?
Well, it's obviously a really nice image. They've been stuck there for several weeks. That family must be absolutely delighted to have them back. I think most people would have been quite touched by the words from Hamza Yousaf a couple of weeks ago when he was saying that we'd spoken to them, we'd said goodbye to them, we weren't sure if we'd ever see them again. Now, obviously, that they're delighted they're back, but there is still some sadness here. There's some quotes in one of the papers from the father-in-law saying that his heart has been broken in two because a lot of their family members are still stuck in Gaza. And the situation with the UK is that if you leave and you've got family members, you can't bring your family members with you, whereas other countries, including the US, are issuing visas to family members of US citizens.
Yeah, a lot of families being split, aren't they?
Families being split and a lot of British nationals still trapped. And you know, we can't forget about them. But, you know, wonderful to see these family members reunited. And Hamza Yousaf has spoken, you know, so passionately about this. We have to take the good news stories, I think, in this conflict where we can. They're so few and far between.
They really are. Let's go to the Express now, front page. Brexit trade freedom boost for the UK economy. There's a report that shows that leaving the EU has actually boosted UK trade. Kate.
So this is a paper coming out tomorrow from my old think tank, the Institute of Economic Affairs, which is reporting that despite what many people claimed would happen, exports and of goods and services to the EU and non-EU countries have risen significantly since Brexit. And the Business and Trade Secretary, Kemi Badenoch, has decided to pick up these numbers and include them in a keynote speech tomorrow, really trying to paint that optimistic version of Brexit. And we have had a lot of revisions to a lot of figures over the past few years, particularly growth figures. And I think that numbers like this do raise questions about how great that reporting has been, what kind of narrative that's crafted, and that perhaps whilst the deal is by no means perfect between the UK and the rest of the EU, the several negotiated deals so far haven't been as bad for trade as previously assumed.
I think, though, if you look at the quotes of what she's planning to say tomorrow, she says that the UK, she says that she wants to talk up the economy, which she says is thriving. I think that most people at home will be wondering if the economy really is thriving.
You don't think 0.2% growth is thriving,
That's
John?
booming. We're really going for it. So I think that, fine. Yeah, Brexit may not be as bad as some of the warnings would be, but the idea that our economy is thriving at the moment is just not reality.
I guess the question is, though, is it due to Brexit?
Well, exactly. And I would argue one of the best things about Brexit is that it's much harder to point the finger at Brussels now and blame Brussels. Questions about growth in the UK go to Westminster now, and it's not going very well.
OK, let's go to the Financial Times now, front page. It's about Elon Musk. Musk enters AI arena saying chatbot Grok will answer spicy questions. John, what are these spicy questions?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, the name Grok just sounds absolutely awful. The idea that some AI bot that you can ask these spicy questions to, like you're some teenage boy in your bedroom. I mean, it just like sums up Elon Musk all in one thing. I mean, he was tweeting today saying, or Xing today, saying that it's going to have this rebellious streak. It's got a sense of humour. It's going to answer your questions with a bit of wit. I mean, let's wait and see. Let's see if kind of sarcasm and humour really have infiltrated this AI machine.
On the whole, I think more competition in this space is a really great thing, and I'm pleased Elon's throwing his name into the race. XAI is what it's called. But I think there is something interesting here. So at the moment, the AI developers, especially around these chatbots, they all have different opinions about what kind of information it should provide if the answer is not certain. And a lot of them have been very cautious so far. They just won't give you the answer if they're not sure. Elon's saying it's going to love sarcasm and have some humor and answer spicy questions suggests he might be erring on the side of being willing to answer more questions. And I think, you know, it would be interesting to see the comparisons and what comes out of them.
Yeah, but also if the answers are actually correct or based on any kind of truth. OK, so let's finish by looking at the Daily Star. the front page there. Here we blow again. More storms. I mean, we're still feeling the impact of Storm Ciarán. Now 4 70-mile-per-hour storms to batter Britain.
I mean, you read that intro, it talks about a 700-mile-wide tempest. Goodness knows what that means. But the best thing, clearly, from that front page is that picture of the little dog in the raincoat and with a brolly. I mean...
Oh, I'm really sorry. The best thing from that front page is the picture of the little cat. Sorry.
The cat's very tranquil. It's like, I'm not fazed by 70
cat's
miles
ready
an hour.
to face the storm.
OK, Kate, John, thank you so much. We'll see you again in the next hour for the moment. Thank you.